I woke up in the middle of the night, and I could hear someone breathing right beside my bed. I wasn't alone. It was around 2 a.m. when it happened. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I had fallen asleep exhausted, but then I woke to a sound that made my blood run cold. Soft, deliberate breathing coming from the edge of my bed. My heart raced as I slowly opened my eyes, scanning the room, but there was nothing there, just shadows stretching across the walls, my lamp casting dim light, and the heavy weight of fear pressing down on me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, imagining the sound in the dark, but then it came again, slower this time, heavier, unmistakable, deliberate. Someone or something was in my room, and it knew I was awake. The first night it happened, I thought I had imagined it. I had been exhausted, working late, and perhaps my mind had conjured up the sensation of someone breathing in my room, that subtle rhythm of air against the pillow beside me. But as I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness, I realized that exhaustion didn't explain the cold shiver running down my spine, the subtle creaks in the floorboards that I had never heard before, or the way the shadows seemed to stretch and shift in ways that defied the dim light of my bedside lamp. And then I felt it again. The inhale, long and deliberate, followed by an exhale that sounded far too close to me, and my heart skipped a beat as I turned my head slowly, trying to convince myself that the corner of the room was empty, that the breathing was nothing but the wind, a trick of my imagination. But the room was still, heavy with the oppressive silence of the night, and the air itself seemed to grow thick, as if something unseen was watching me, breathing with me, calculating every twitch of my muscles, every shallow gasp I tried to hide. And I froze, my eyes darting to the closet door, to the window, to the shadows beneath the bed, unable to determine where the presence was, if it was real, if it had taken form. And as I lay there, trying to steady my trembling hands, the breathing changed slightly, a rhythm that mimicked my own, as if it were learning, adjusting, testing me. And I could no longer convince myself that I was alone, that this was a trick of fatigue, because every instinct screamed that I was being observed by something intelligent, something patient, waiting for me to make a mistake, to shift, to blink, to breathe too loudly. And I realized that if I moved, if I reached for my phone, I might provoke it, awaken it fully. And so I stayed frozen, listening to each inhale, each exhale, counting them in my mind, until the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the curtains. And with the rising sun, the breathing stopped, as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind only the oppressive sense that it had been there all along, hidden, watching, waiting. And I knew that night that sleep would never come easy again, that the shadows in my room had been invaded by something unseen, and that the sound of someone breathing, real or imagined, had left a mark I could feel in my bones. A warning that what haunts us is not always visible, but always present, lingering just beyond perception, waiting for the next dark hour when our defenses are down and our vulnerability is high. The second night was worse, because by then I wasn't just anxious, I was terrified, lying in bed with every nerve on edge, waiting for the inevitable. And it came just after midnight, when the house had fallen into that unnatural silence that makes every little creak feel amplified. And I heard it immediately, that deliberate, measured breathing, heavier this time, closer, as if whatever had been there the night before had moved, learned my habits, and now knew exactly where I would be, how I would react. And my body froze, muscles locked in place, as the sound drew nearer, shifting across the room in a way that had no logical explanation. And when I turned my head toward the closet, I thought I saw the shadows flicker, almost like something had stepped out of the darkness and into the faint circle of light cast by my lamp. But when I blinked, nothing was there, only the oppressive, stifling presence, a sense of being watched so intensely that I felt exposed in every way possible. And then the breathing changed again, a subtle cadence that matched my own inhaling and exhaling, almost mocking, almost intimate. And my mind raced through every rational explanation air vent house. settling my imagination, but every fiber of my being screamed that this was something else, something aware, calculating, testing me. And I tried to reach for my phone on the nightstand, thinking maybe light or sound could give me some measure of control. But my hand trembled so violently, I dropped it, the clatter echoing across the room. And in that moment, the breathing stopped, leaving only a silence so thick it pressed against my ears and made me dizzy. And I swore I saw movement at the edge of my vision, a shape crouched, low, just beyond the reach of the lamplight. And my heart pounded so loud it drowned out every rational thought. And I realized that this presence wasn't just there to scare me. It was studying me, gauging my fear, learning how I reacted to the unknown, to the dark, to the sound of it. And as I sat upright, paralyzed, I felt a cold brush against my arm. A sensation so real, it made me yelp and roll onto the floor. And when I scrambled to the door, desperate to flee, the shape disappeared. But the breathing returned, now synchronized with mine, heavier, deliberate, patient, almost as if it were whispering without words. And I understood then that it wasn't going to leave, that it had made a home in the corners of my mind, in the spaces where I thought I was alone. And that night, I spent hours on the floor, listening, counting, trying to prepare for the inevitable return, knowing that sleep would be impossible, that darkness was no longer safe, and that some things, once they learn the rhythm of your life, don't need to show themselves to terrify you. They just need to breathe. By the third night, exhaustion and fear had merged into a thick fog that clouded my thoughts. And I knew that no matter how tired I was, I couldn't close my eyes for more than a few minutes without waking to that chilling, deliberate breathing. And that night it escalated in a way I hadn't anticipated. The moment I opened my eyes, I felt it immediately close, too close. A presence that pressed against the edge of my bed without moving. And as I turned my head slowly, heart hammering, I thought I glimpsed the shadow of a figure crouched just beyond a dim circle of lamplight. But when I blinked, it was gone, leaving only the silence that made my ears ring. And then the breathing began again, synchronized perfectly with my own heavier, sharper, almost mocking. And I realized with a sickening dread that it had been learning, watching, timing me, learning. My sleep patterns, my reactions, my fears, and the shadows around the room seemed to pulse as if alive, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't follow the contours of the furniture. And I felt a sudden, icy brush against my shoulder that made me cry out, scramble upright, only to see an empty bed beside me. The covers rumpled, as though someone had just been lying there. And my phone, which I had left on the nightstand for comfort, now displayed static interference as though it were being affected by the presence itself. The monitor app flickering erratically despite being turned off. And then it spoke softly at first, a whisper so familiar it made me recoil, saying my name, drawing it out in a way that sounded almost human, almost intimate. And I froze, paralyzed with fear, knowing that it had learned my voice, my reactions, my name, and was now mimicking me, speaking to me in a language designed to unnerve, confuse, and manipulate. And I tried to flee, lunging for the door. But the shadows seemed to stretch, the room itself warping, my familiar surroundings turning alien, as if the house had been claimed by something invisible and malevolent. And every instinct screamed that if I ran, I would provoke it. If I stayed, I would become prey to its game. And when I finally dared to glance at the bed again, the breathing had stopped, replaced by silence so heavy it pressed against my chest. And I realized the entity wasn't gone. It was just waiting, patient, cunning, biding its time for the exact moment my guard fell. And I spent the rest of the night on the floor, clutching a blanket like a shield, ears straining, body trembling, aware that what I was facing was intelligent, patient, and impossible to predict. And I understood in that moment that fear alone wasn't enough to protect me, because some presences don't need to show themselves to terrify. They only need to exist. Breathing in the darkness, learning the rhythm of your life, and waiting for the moment you think you're finally safe. The fourth night was the one I'll never forget, because by then, I knew it wasn't just testing me. It had grown bold, confident, and I could feel it in every corner of my room. A presence that pressed against the air, heavy, suffocating. And as I lay in bed, too terrified to move, I heard the breathing begin once more, closer than ever, almost at my ear, and then it shifted, subtly, deliberately, like a shadow sliding across the wall. And I realized with horror that the sound wasn't just around me, it was in me, echoing inside my chest, synchronized with my heartbeat, following my movements, anticipating them. And when I slowly turned to the side, I saw it. A dark, indistinct figure crouched at the edge of the bed, just beyond the weak glow of my nightlight, and my throat went dry. My muscles locked because it didn't move like a human, didn't breathe like a human, yet it exuded a presence that was almost tangible, almost solid. And then it whispered my name, low and deliberate, and I felt it brush my hand, icy and real. And my eyes widened as I realized it was reaching for me, testing me, and I recoiled, scrambling backward. But my feet caught the edge of the blanket, sending me sprawling onto the floor, and the figure was gone, vanished into the shadows, yet the breathing persisted, now from multiple directions surrounding me, pressing me down, mocking me, and I heard a soft giggle that chilled me to the bone. Something not human, but childlike, almost playful, as if it had learned how to manipulate fear like a game. And I clutched my knees, rocking slightly, trying to calm myself. But the whispers returned, now clearly repeating my deepest fears, mimicking my partner's voice, my own voice, saying, "You can't hide. I see you. I know you." And I realized with a sinking heart that this presence didn't need to touch me to terrify me. It had learned me, studied me, adapted to my reactions, and it had no intention of leaving because it had made me part of its world. A world where darkness held sway, and shadows weren't empty, and silence wasn't peace. And I stayed on the floor for hours, shivering, listening to the breathing ebb and flow around me like a living predator, until the first pale light of dawn crept through the curtains, and with it, the presence receded, leaving only a heavy, lingering fear, a certainty that it would return, waiting for the next night, the next dark hour, when I would think I was safe. And I understood then, more than ever, that some things don't need to be seen to terrify you. They only need to breathe. And as long as I live, I will never sleep without hearing it. By the fifth night, I had barely slept for days, my body drained, my mind frayed, and yet I knew there was no escaping it. The moment darkness fell, the house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for me to relax, to let my guard down, and I lay in bed, gripping the sheets so tightly my knuckles were white, listening to the familiar rhythm of my own breathing. When I realized it had returned, even before I had drifted into sleep, that slow, deliberate inhale, the exhale that seemed to vibrate in my chest, and then I heard it move closer, shifting softly across the floor, subtle but unmistakable, like the brushing of a shadow along the carpet, and panic surged through me, freezing me in place as I strained to see, to perceive any shape, any motion. But the room remained dimly lit, deceptively ordinary, and yet I felt it behind me, above me, pressing against the air itself. And then a soft whisper broke the silence, low and intimate, almost gentle. My name, drawn out, measured, deliberate, echoing as though it had come from every corner of the room at once. And I realized with horror that it had learned to speak like me, to imitate, to confuse, to terrify, and the shadows danced at the edges of the nightlight, stretching impossibly, twisting into shapes that mimicked limbs, figures, faces, all just beyond recognition, all just out of reach. And I heard it again, soft, mocking, repeating a phrase that I had never spoken aloud, but had only thought in moments of fear. "You can hide. I see everything." And suddenly, the bed shook gently, then more violently, as if something invisible had climbed onto it, and I scrambled backward, heart hammering, stumbling to the floor as the breathing intensified. Louder now, heavier, deliberate, synchronized with every panic-stricken beat of my heart. And then it laughed, a sound not human, not childlike, but something that mimicked joy in a twisted, unnatural way, and I felt cold hands or something like them graze my arms, brush my hair, move over the blanket, tangible yet invisible. And I realized with a terror that pierced every fiber of my being that this was not just a haunting, not just a trick of sleep. It was intelligent, aware, learning, and it had been preparing me, conditioning me for this moment when fear alone would no longer be enough. And I tried to flee, bolting to the door, my trembling hands fumbling with the handle. But the room seemed to stretch impossibly, walls bending, shadows growing, corners receding, as if the house itself had been claimed by this presence. And the whisper returned, slower now, deliberate, repeating my name in tones meant to draw me in, to hypnotize. And I realized that no matter where I ran, no matter how far, no matter how light or sound I brought into the room, it would follow, it would breathe, it would wait, patient, cunning, and relentless. And that night, I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, listening as the breathing ebbed and flowed, felt it brush past me, soft and deliberate, knowing that I had been marked, that my sleep, my peace, my sense of security had been forever stolen. And as dawn finally began to seep through the curtains, the presence receded just enough for me to breathe, leaving behind a house that looked normal, but a mind that would never forget. And the chilling truth settled in. Some things don't just haunt you, they learn you, stalk you, and wait patiently in the darkness until the exact moment they know you're most vulnerable. And all you can do is listen, frozen, as they breathe. They say fear fades with the morning light, but some presences don't leave when the sun rises. If you ever hear a quiet, deliberate breath in your room when you're alone, don't move. Don't speak. Just listen, because some things aren't gone. They're waiting.